What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Culture Based Podcast. I'm Dustin, he's Blake, and today we're going to work on the farm, old McDonald
Oh my
style.
God. I wondered if you're going to throw something in there. I was like, he's been quiet for a second. Do I need to throw in some farm reference?
Farm, insert witty farm reference. Boom. Old McDonald style today, building a farm league. Gonna talk a little baseball, gonna talk a little farming. It's gonna be great. I want to remind you before we get started that we're here. The reason we exist in general and why we're doing this podcast for you is that we want to help leaders know what they're about, show where they're going, and build scalable teams to get them there, help them develop those teams, right? So that's what we're all about. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to theculturebase.com, click on strategy for a free 30-minute strategy session with us on how we can help you implement this idea. I would love for you to follow along with us on social media. I think we're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can follow us at The Culture Base. Come by, say hello. Let's have a chat. Maybe we can open up a discussion there about what you've got going on as well. If you're listening to this on audio, thank you for listening. We would love a 5-star review. Helps this content go further. And if you're watching on YouTube, oh, hello there. So good to see you.
Hey,
I hope my shirt isn't too distracting for you.
it's a great shirt.
And just going to leave it at that, because if you're only listening, you're missing out. Yeah, so thanks for watching on YouTube. Go ahead and hit the thumbs up, the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell if you haven't already, to get notifications every time we drop new content for you. This podcast comes out every Tuesday. We're dropping some reels and clips throughout the week for you as well, for you to kind of get some bite-sized nuggets and to share some of the stuff with your team as well. So, Blake, I think I got everything. It's farm league time. It's farm league time. We're in the postseason as we're recording this. We're in the postseason of baseball now. It did not go the way that I wanted it to, as a Braves fan. This may be one of the more boring World Series matchups there is in terms of like name teams, but I will say these two teams are fun to watch. We got Texas and Arizona that are playing. I'm going for Arizona just because there's a few players on the Rangers that I don't really care for. But there's also some really cool players on the Rangers as well. So go Snakes.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. It's as of time of this recording, I think we're tied at a game apiece. So it's going to be fun. I like October baseball. But, like, it's an incredible thing to watch the sports team thrive in the next man up style of business. They seem to have an endless supply of talent at their hands and make it look so effortless. But great teams put a high emphasis on building this detailed system. So what does it look like for you to build a farm league? That's what we're going to talk about today, right, Blake?
Yep. And this idea hasn't always been around, right? Of the farm league. Like I wish I was more of a baseball guy. I really do, because it just is like, man, the history about it and just like all the analytics, like it seems like the thing I should love.
It's America's
agree.
pastime.
Yeah, it's America's pastime, right? Like I should be about this. Like, what kind of American am I? But if it happened on one day a week that I plan for every week, I think I'd do it. It's just like
it's a lot. It's a lot.
all
It's
the
over.
time.
It's 100 some odd games a year.
Yeah.
It's a lot. There's a lot going on.
But I love it because I do feel like business and baseball are just so similar. And really one can really learn from the other. And I feel like the reason I like baseball so much in like a theoretical sense is because they are so creative about how they come to their solutions. And they have been all throughout history, like starting in the 20s, and just they don't have a one size fits all, right? Like they are very creative about how they come to their solutions. And this whole topic today of building your farm league is all about that third part of why we exist, of creating a scalable team to get you somewhere, right? And to some goal. And so if like you're like, oh, I don't really care to ever grow, I kind of just want to exist and that's it, then this probably isn't your episode. But I'll tell you that if you aren't looking to grow at all or develop people, that will have a negative repercussion on you. And I don't mean necessarily like grow to massive like capacities. I just mean that if you don't have a mentality of growth and development, you're probably going to see people live or leave. So 94% of team members or employees said that they would stay longer with an organization if that organization would focus on developing them. 94%. That is such a high number. That means literally doing anything to develop your team has a 94% chance of keeping that person longer than maybe they were going to stay. And we talked a whole bunch last time on just the ROI of keeping people and what that looks like and how that affects us. 94% is a big number and really doesn't have to have a massive like structured system to do so. It's just the idea of developing. Okay. And so where we get into baseball, back in the 1920s, because I love the history of baseball, like I said, back in the 1920s, there was a guy named Branch Rickey. He was a Major League Baseball player and then became a manager, and he started managing the St. Louis Cardinals, okay, who at the time weren't very good. And so he got this idea of what if instead of just constantly trying to find people and then just um, only looking for the home runs all the time, oh, nice pun, huh? Um, what if we could to develop these people at a younger age and start developing the mindsets we want within our team? And so he created what they called a farm league, or a farm team, and they started all these farm teams started playing each other, and they were able to see how they did under pressure. They were able to see how they responded to certain criticisms. They were able to see how these young guys dealt with the public light. They were able to see a whole bunch of things that you aren't able to see if you just hire someone or throw someone into your organization right away. They were able to see if they got this style of system that they played within a certain area. And so he started doing this. Branch Rickey was also the guy who was known for bringing Jackie Robinson through, right? And so, like, kind of a big name that all
Mm.
started through the farm league system. And after that, after he started implementing this, the 30s and 40s, they won World Series or whatever it was called at the time. They started winning those a bunch. And, Major League Baseball is a very copycat mentality too. And so everyone was like, all right, we probably should do this now that we see it works. Let's just start building this development system. And just the amount of success and expansion those teams had that started doing this was just unreal. So,
Mm.
and his legacy today is just, I mean, it's maybe you haven't heard of Branch Rickey, but for those who have, know he really helped change the game of baseball.
Yeah. So today, where we sit now in baseball, what we know as farm leagues is essentially it's one or more minor leagues. Obviously, we have AAA, double A, single A, minor league kind of teams and franchises and leagues. So it's one or more minor league teams owned by a baseball franchise, and they use those teams as a training and testing ground for rookies who, if they perform well,
Mm.
will move on to play in the main major league team, or as they call it in baseball, they've moved on to the show. So, what does that look like in business, Blake? What does a farm league look like in a, let's just use Ridgeline for example, your
Mhm.
your your company. What does a farm league look like for Ridgeline?
Yeah, for us, it's starting first off, we have different systems for different positions. Okay. So like building a farm league is just that constant mindset of development and seeing that they have that capacity, they get it, that they have what is it, the get it, want it, and
Get it,
capacity
want
to
it,
do it.
capacity.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's being able to identify those things in those different positions. And so we have a little bit more structure than we used to. We usually build our farm league from the bottom up as far as entry level, like I know nothing. We build that kind of stuff. And then since then we've built development programs where someone says, "Hey, I think I do want to go to that next level." And we kind of enter them in there. But one of the big things as we're like looking at people is We are trying to see that they have the talent to do the thing, right? Like that's something you constantly want to be able to identify is do they have the talent to do the thing? Do they have the character? And do they have the mindset? And mindset, especially back in Branch Ricky's day, he said, I remember him saying that was such a big aspect of what they were looking for in their farm leagues was that they had the right mindset to
Mm,
overcome those really hard challenges or those being down, 6 runs to 1 and how you're going to come out of that, late in the
yeah.
ninth. And like those whole, those were the things that he was really trying to advance because really on a technical sense, you're advancing some, but if you don't get the right mindset with that technical, you're not going to have a success story. And
Right.
so,
Are you an overcomer? Are you a person
mhm,
that can overcome
yeah,
obstacles and, flip that switch when the switch, needs to be flipped? I want to ask you, Blake, too. I
yeah,
think it's worth asking because we're making the analogy to minor league baseball teams. Those are completely separate teams. It is still within the franchise,
yeah.
but it's completely separate teams. How does that translate over into business? It's not like you have a AAA version
Mm,
of Ridgeline Electrical, right? It's all still operating within the same team. So what how do we make that
mm,
connection there
parallel.
in business?
Yeah, for us, that parallel is really a positional aspect of a
Yeah.
level of responsibility. And can you run your own job or do you understand how the whole system works? With those types of development, though, I think like without getting too siloed in your company, I think the thing you've got to make sure is that your values still align, right? So,
Mhm.
like, let's take the Pittsburgh Pirates, for example. Their minor league team is the Indianapolis Indians. Their mindsets, their core values, they hold true across the organization at large, but you're operating in different ways and different capacities so that you can get there, but have that right attitude once you do get there. So I think that it's um, a minor league aspect versus a major league aspect is really about helping people build through those core values, build that technical ability, and then putting them in the right places once we feel like, you know what, you've really graduated from this point. Now you're at this point, but the values don't change. Our mindsets maybe change a little, but
Yeah.
the values don't.
Yeah, so we're the bulk of the rest of this episode is going to be kind of like how, right? And where do we begin to establish this other league, this farm league system that we need in here. And Blake talked about we need to focus on talent, character, and mindset. So
Mm.
we talked about mindset for a few seconds here, but let's just go back and let's just start at the top with the talent. What does it mean to focus on talent when you're building your farm league?
Well, I mean, you got to see that they have the ability, right? That they get and understand how to do the thing. And if you don't have some kind of system that helps people know what is for Ridgeline, my company, what is the Ridgeline way of doing things? What are the codes that
Mm.
we like? You follow codes for sure, but what are those like best practices that we really implement and making sure people are hitting those things over and over? When we think about how to build all of this at once, I think I think first before you can do any of this, you've got to get to know your people, right? And if all of this is those people are still just a number in your head, like, oh, they're not quite at the majors, so they're really not that important. Like that, the thing I love about the minor league baseball is when you get a name that comes through the minor leagues that just starts taking off to go to the majors, and you're like, oh,
Mhm.
I knew him before, dot, dot,
Yeah.
dot. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think that that's where Branch Rickey was so good is that he got to know those people in his organizations. As a manager, he wasn't just on the Cardinals. He was focusing on all levels and getting to know people and getting to know their strengths and the areas that they're going to have struggles with. And that's what actually led him to finding some of this talent that we maybe never would have got to the majors if we didn't have this aspect. So I think the first thing you've got to do is you got to know your people.
Yeah, and we talk all the time about implementing a structured system, and the reason we talk about that isn't so that there's no flexibility. The reason we talk about that is so that there's this clear understanding of what the beginning, middle, and end of these processes look like. If you go back to one of our last couple of episodes, we talked about processes, right? So what does that look like here in this instance? Is that you need to have a structured system of development. You need to establish what this process is going to look like for you, which could be, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, could be very different depending on the type of business that you run and the size of business that you run. But you need to establish that process, and you need to document it. We talk all the time about documenting these processes. This one is no different. So when you have someone that enters into your company, we go back to that statistic of 94% leave because
Mm.
the organization is not focused on development. Part of your onboarding, when you hire someone new, should be walking them through what the development process looks like, and you can't walk them through that consistently every single time if it's not documented down and for them to understand and for you to be reminded of constantly throughout.
Mm. Yeah, and with that structured system, that it also gives the people who are getting developed confidence in you, right? So
Mhm.
when you have something that says, "Hey, this is how we develop people," people believe it. I mean, you could be lying out of your teeth, but they will believe it because you seem confident in the fact that you have something set up to lead someone on a journey of not knowing to knowing. I think another thing we've got to do in this is have clear expectations. And these clear expectations are so important because you are giving them a clear picture of what it is to win, right? So, in this win that we're looking for, we are wanting it to be, having a hard time thinking of exactly how to say this. When you give them, here's everything, it's maybe a little bit overwhelming, right? Like,
Mm,
here's everything you need to be. Give them one thing. I think this
mm,
is where developers go wrong, is that we're like, "Oh, you're in the minors. I need to see you here. Are you there? Nope, ignore you. Are you here? Nope, ignore you." And instead, giving clear expectations of, here's what I need to see out of you. I need to see this one thing done consistently for 3 weeks. And then
mm,
you see it and you go, "Great. That's awesome. Now you're building the domino fall effect. Okay, now let's do this thing. And then let's do this thing." If you say, "I need you to be here as this high level change," they don't know all the steps to get to that point. You have to legitimately walk them through the step by step process of that, and give them clear expectations um, of each step. If you can do that, your team's going to grow so much quicker, and it makes it so much easier for you to develop. Because if you don't know the steps and can't clearly call it out, how are they?
yeah. For sure, for sure, and those, and like you said, those check-ins, those clear expectations, that's what creates the consistent follow-up and accountability piece of implementing this farm league, right? Like, I love what you said about how you can't just say, "Oh, are you there yet? No, you're not there yet. Come back to me when you're there yet." That there's no follow through, there's no accountability in that for them to actually get to the place where you want them to get to. And so implementing, okay, how often, literally, how often are we going to check in on this process? Is it going to be monthly? Is it going to be quarterly? Is it going to be
Mm,
weekly? Hey, I asked you to go do those three things, like Blake said. I'm going to check back in with you on X date to see. Isn't it? You're not just leaving it. Just, it's not like come back to me.
mm,
When those three things, like, I'm going to follow up with you on this because I care about it as much, if not more, than what you do,
mm,
and I'm willing to show you that by prioritizing where it falls for me, the follow up and the accountability
mm.
piece. Let me ask you this, Blake. How deep should these rosters be on in the farm league for these businesses?
That's hard. It's hard because it's not, I don't think that there's a one size fits all here, which
Mm,
leads to the idea that scalability matters, and
yeah.
that, and is maybe one of the reasons people struggle with scaling their teams, is because they try to only understand them from wherever they have been or where they are, instead of getting creative with how do we scale to a further point. Um, But in the same sense, I think you've also got to understand your resource scalability. And do you have the ability to have someone full time focusing on this? Do you have, like, should you be developing, in my case, estimators? Right now, I don't really need more than 2 estimators full time estimating for me. Should I be pushing super hard to develop my estimating courses and build that team and that backlog of estimators? Should I have 10 estimators on backlog? I don't think so. It's maybe a little bit too much. I can get a little pickier there. But in
Mm,
my technician level, I need constant backlog. I need to constantly be building that because it also builds my foremen and builds my field supervisors. And so I think one part is understanding um, your scalable needs, and you got to be looking 1 year, 3 year, 5 years out to understand those needs, and then plan your development that way too. um, and just like we were saying, the depth of that position, how many of these am I going to need in 3 years, how many of these am I going to need in 5 years? um, and then one aspect of that kind of you got to think through as well, and I know I'm not really answering that real clear of how deep should your roster be, but I think these are things and questions you should ask to understand. We don't really know without asking these things. But the last
mm,
one would be, how long does each position take to develop?
yeah.
How long will it take for someone's mindset to really click? And how long are they going to be sitting around that 80% productive for? And if it's a long time, then maybe that training and development needs to be happening sooner. And
Yeah.
if you can't calendar timeline this out, like where you draw a line and say, here's where I am today, here's where we are in 3 years, and here's what it's going to take to get there, and try to like, hey, in quarter 3 of year 2, I better have 3 guys, 3 gals that I'm looking at who are going to fit this role.
Yeah, and we talked in an earlier episode about the cost of turnover, and I think that
Mm.
plays a part here in knowing the same thing that Blake's talking about now of how long does it take each position to develop because and that's another good reason to have that farm league, right? Because if you're hiring, I mean, this whole farm league system to begin with really promotes developing from within rather than constantly having to look outside of your organization for talent. Now, do baseball teams look outside of their organization for talent? Do they
Oh
make
yeah.
trades? Like, things like do they make acquisitions midseason? 100%. But they also have this farm league built in to develop people that are already in the system up to that. And so imagine that you have an entry level person coming in and you have this development plan to get them to a mid-level position, right? Instead of you having to outs or hire out for that mid-level position, and it takes that question that we just talked about, it takes 12 months to bring that person up to 80% capacity, right? You kind of you're losing money during that 12 months because you're bringing that person up, you're having someone else make sure that person is coming up, right? And which is sometimes necessary, especially with fast growth, right? But if we have that person that we go back to and say, hey, we hired them as this entry level person, while they're doing that job, we've been building and developing them into this mid-level person, right? Then when they get there, there is no 12 months of developing. They're ready. They've been developed
Yeah.
whilst they were doing this other job as well. And
Mm.
so I think that's to me where understanding how long each position takes to develop goes bigger than just the farm league. It goes into your turnover mindset as well of how do I what is it going to cost me in the long run to
Mhm.
develop someone internally versus to have to constantly go outside of our organization and bring someone in? Those are real dollars and real costs and real time that
Mhm.
you may or may not have.
Yeah. And with that, when you're trying to like gauge, do I bring someone outside of the organization or do I work at my farm league? The whole outside your organization is very circumstantial.
Mm,
Okay. I'm not saying it's wrong. I think that a blended perspective and process is really good. But I think if you don't have a farm league and you're just trying to get that outside of your organization fines, that's very circumstantial. And how do you scale that? Like,
mm,
how do you don't have control over how that happens. It pops up and then you respond. So you're reactive. Reactive is okay, but it's not okay as your only focus on how you're going to develop your team, because labor is the most expensive part of business. And if it's going to be maybe not the most expensive, but the riskiest, I think it's the
mm,
riskiest part of business. And so if you are playing this reactive game all the time, then your growth will also be reactive and completely whatever the economy is going to give at the time. Building a farm league, you get to know the person, you get to know the talent, you get to know their character, you get to know their mindset. You don't know that with the reactive stuff. There's still a level of risk. There's still a level that during their interviews and their performance based statistics they gave you, they didn't give the whole truth, right?
Yeah.
You know the whole truth, or at least a better whole truth through your farm league.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you one last question as we talk about how to build this farm league. And I understand the question here is going to be much like the last question, where it may not have a simple black and white answer, because we have business, owners and leaders from all different perspectives and all different shapes and sizes of the organization. So, but I think it's important to ask this question, because I think one thing that'll stop somebody from putting a time and effort into building this farm league is they go, well, I don't have anybody to run it.
Mm.
So, like, who runs the farm league?
I had a mentor before I started my company who said, what does a CEO do? And I was like, I don't know. That's why I'm here. And he was like, a CEO does two things. He builds and creates his people, and he builds and creates opportunities. Builds and creates people, builds and creates opportunities.
Hmm.
When he or she is not focused on doing that, we miss it. And so the answer is not necessarily the CEO, but the CEO's got to have buy-in. Branch Rickey was the general manager of the Cardinals. He didn't do everything, but he had the ownership of our team has to develop. So I would say first and foremost, whoever's at the top, whoever's leading, has got to believe in it and believe that the system is the right way to develop our people.
Hmm.
However, I think it changes, and it can be very blended, and that's okay. The hard part is not everybody is talented in developing people. And so if your organization is really big and you have the resources to hire someone who focuses on this, then great. But I would just caution that that person really needs to have an understanding of whatever area they're going to develop, right? They
Hmm.
need to have an understanding. If you're like developing a sales area, then that person needs to understand it, or they need to hire someone out who does understand it and can develop the process or run that aspect of it, right? This is why we have pitching coaches, why we have hitting coaches, why we have, all these specialty coaches. It's not because the person at the top understands how to teach all those things. They know how to find the right people for those things. So having one person over it, if you've got the resources, awesome. Another way is whoever's over your one division of sales, one division of marketing, one division of operations, one division of finance. As you're looking at those areas, that person can be the person running the development, or running someone who runs the development to make sure that we're developing those people.
Yeah.
So there really is a blended ability here. But if there's no buy-in at top, I'll tell you that this probably isn't going to go get any legs, because they're not going to want to implement resources to it, because they're going to see them as expenses instead of investments. And
Yeah.
that's hard to overcome.
For sure. For sure. I mean, I feel like we've covered the topic pretty good. It's been a fun journey through all the things that it takes us to build this farm league. And so, I would just encourage you to stop, take notes, go back, listen to the things over again. But at the end of the day, you got to focus on the talent, the character, and the mindset. To build this farm league the way that your company needs. Don't try to mimic someone else's farm league. Build it the way that your company needs. That's what leaders do.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for being with us. Next podcast, so I guess next week, we're going to talk about a traction term called an integrator or integration.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about how integration is very key to the success of your culture, because we got to have somebody that's going to drive that ship. And know where that ship is going to go. So we're going to talk about how integration is key. I want to remind you You can check us out at theculturebase.com, get a free 30-minute strategy session with us on how we can help you know what you're about, know where you're going, show where you're going, and develop scalable teams to get you there. Culturebase.com/strategy. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn at The Culture Base. And yeah, we can't wait to be with you next time talking about how integration is key. I feel like you look at something when you want to say. Something funny?
No, your internet hit hard and it like bogged out. So I don't know if it did it on your side, but it went quiet for a couple minutes. My eyes went, okay, keep smiling. But I think you got a good spot to end on if you need to cut all this.
Cool. And if not, this is just a little peek behind the curtain that we're not sitting in the same spot.
Yeah.
but you knew that because you're watching on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time on the Culture Base podcast.